No one in Britain believed, even for a moment, that a small African kingdom could challenge the most powerful empire on earth. And no one in southern Africa imagined that a distant European island nation would one day march deep into Zululand, demanding submission from a people who had never bowed to anyone. But history is full of moments where pride meets power, where misunderstanding turns into war, and where two worlds collide so suddenly that neither side truly understands the other until it is too late. And this war, the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, became exactly that. A brutal confrontation between an expanding empire and one of the strongest indigenous militaries ever formed. What made the British believe they could simply walk into Zululand? Why did the Zulu Kingdom decide to fight back, knowing the odds? And how did this conflict produce one of the most shocking defeats in British military history? In this video, I'm going to tell you the full story from the politics, to the battles, to the consequences of the war that changed Southern Africa forever. So without any delay, let's start. To understand why the war happened, you have to understand the world that existed in Southern Africa before the first shot was even fired. The Zulu Kingdom was not just a tribe, it was a disciplined military state forged by the legendary Shaka Zulu earlier in the century. Shaka had reorganized the Zulu people into powerful regiments called Amabutho, trained them in close combat fighting with short stabbing spears, and built a centralized kingdom that dominated the region. By the time of the war, Shaka was long dead, but the structure he created remained. The Zulu army was enormous compared to its neighbors, well-organized, fast-moving, and fiercely loyal to their king, Cetshwayo campaigned. Cetshwayo himself was a strong ruler, respected by his people and committed to protecting Zulu independence. But he also understood the growing threat of European expansion. The British colony of Natal lay right on Zulu borders, and British administrators were increasingly hungry to unite the entire region under their control. From the British side, the story begins with power and ambition. The British Empire wanted a confederation system in southern Africa, one central government controlling all territories, from Natal to the Boer republics to Zululand itself. But the problem was simple. The Zulus were too strong, too proud, and too unwilling to let their land be absorbed into someone else's empire. High Commissioner Sir Bartle Frere, the man pushing the confederation idea, believed that the Zulu Kingdom had to be neutralized or crushed before his political plans could succeed. He also believed wrongly that the Zulu army posed an immediate threat to British settlements. And with this combination of fear, misunderstanding, and imperial confidence, Frere took matters into his own hands. In December 1878, the British delivered an ultimatum to Cetshwayo. It demanded impossible things: disbanding the Zulu army, allowing British law to govern the kingdom, and giving up the traditional Zulu system that had existed for generations. Cetshwayo was given 30 days to accept. But the ultimatum was never meant to be accepted. It was designed to be refused, giving the British a justification for war. And so when the deadline passed, British forces prepared to invade. King Cetshwayo did not want war, but he refused to surrender Zulu sovereignty. He hoped for peace, but he prepared for battle. And when British troops crossed into Zululand in January 1879, they expected an easy campaign. The British army marched with rifles, artillery, and the confidence of a global empire. Soldiers joked that it would be finished within weeks. But they underestimated everything: the terrain, the Zulu discipline, and the speed at which the Zulu army could assemble and strike. The British invaded in 3 columns, moving slowly across rugged land, unsure of the enemy's location. The Zulus watched them from the hills, staying hidden, waiting for the right moment. And that moment came at a lonely hill called Isandlwana. The British had camped there casually, without defensive fortifications. They believed the Zulus wouldn't dare attack them head-on. They had no idea that nearly 20,000 Zulu warriors were already gathering nearby, hidden in the folds of the landscape. On January 22, 1879, the British woke up to a scene that would haunt them forever. The Zulu army appeared in overwhelming numbers, advancing in the famous Horns of the Buffalo formation chest, horns and loins designed to encircle and crush the enemy. The British fired volley after volley, but the Zulus kept coming, running, sliding, darting through the grass with incredible speed. Ammunition distribution broke down, officers panicked, and the lines began to collapse. Within hours, the British camp was overrun. Nearly every soldier was killed. It was one of the worst defeats Britain had ever suffered against an indigenous force, and it shocked the entire empire. Newspapers in London could not believe the reports. Thousands of British soldiers dead at the hands of men armed mostly with spears. But while Isandlwana was a disaster for the British, another event occurred the same day that British propaganda quickly used to redeem their pride. At Rorke's Drift, a small British outpost defended by barely 150 soldiers, around 4,000 Zulus launched repeated attacks. The defenders, fighting from barricades of mealie bags and biscuit boxes, somehow held out through the night. The Zulu warriors fought bravely, but British firepower, plus their fortified position, allowed them to survive the assault. In the morning, the Zulu forces withdrew. The British Empire celebrated Rorke's Drift as a heroic victory, even awarding 11 Victoria Crosses. But everyone knew that the real story of the day was the destruction at Isandlwana. Still, the war was far from over. King Cetshwayo had won a huge victory, but he understood that defeating the British once did not mean the war was finished. The empire would return, angrier and stronger. Meanwhile, British commanders were humiliated and furious. Reinforcements were rushed from all over the empire. Soldiers, officers, artillery, and supplies poured into Natal. This time, the British planned to fight carefully, deliberately, and with overwhelming force, and yet the Zulu army was not broken. They regrouped, rearmed, and prepared for the next strike. Cetshwayo continued to hope for a negotiated peace, but the British had no intention of recognizing Zulu independence. The invasion would restart bigger, slower, but relentless. Meanwhile, deep inside Zululand, the kingdom itself was beginning to fracture. Some Zulu chiefs disagreed with Cetshwayo's strategy. Others feared the long-term consequences of fighting such a powerful empire. At the same time, British forces were slowly learning how to counter Zulu tactics, how to build better defensive positions, how to protect supply lines, and how to maintain steady firepower. And as both sides prepared for the second phase of the war, one thing became clear. The next battles would be even more brutal, and the fate of an entire nation would hang in the balance. The British response after Isandlwana was fueled by humiliation, anger, and the determination to restore imperial prestige. Reinforcements poured into South Africa, thousands of new soldiers, better equipment, Gatling guns, artillery, engineers, and supplied caravans. They reorganized their entire strategy, splitting their forces more carefully, securing supply lines, and advancing with fortified positions. The idea was simple: never again let a British army be surprised by the Zulus. And although the British blamed Chelmsford for the earlier disaster, they also believed that the Zulu victory was a temporary glitch in the march of empire, something that must be corrected at any cost. The war then entered its second and more brutal phase. The British now pushed deeper into Zululand with overwhelming firepower. Battles like Gingin-Lovu and Kambula marked a new chapter, where disciplined volleys, fortified lagers, and machine guns tore through Zulu ranks. At Kambale, the Zulus attacked with their usual courage and precision, executing a massive encircling maneuver. But the British were ready. Their fortified camp, surrounded by trenches and wagons, became a fortress of rifles. The Zulus advanced wave after wave into a wall of gunfire. Over 1,000 Zulus fell, and the battle broke the military backbone of Cetshwayo's kingdom. The tragedy was that while the Zulus fought with unbelievable bravery, traditional warfare simply could not match the pace of industrial-age weaponry. The Ikwawa and the Cowhorn formation were still effective at close range, but British rifles fired faster, farther, and more accurately. The Gatling gun alone could cut down dozens in seconds. The Zulus had heart, no one questioned that, but the British had technology. And in the modern world, that difference was fatal. Meanwhile, political pressure was mounting back in London. Newspapers were shocked by Isandlwana, but also inspired by Rorke's Drift. Public opinion demanded victory, demanding that the empire restore its reputation. The idea of a savage kingdom defeating imperial troops was unacceptable to British pride. The Zulu War therefore became about more than just South Africa. It became a symbol of imperial strength, a test of Britain's global dominance. And the government knew that losing this war would have ripple effects across the empire, encouraging resistance in other colonies. King Cetshwayo, watching all this unfold, was trapped. He had never wanted this war. He ruled with discipline, trying to maintain order among his warriors while navigating British diplomatic pressure. He knew his people could fight, but he also knew they could not replace British losses the way an empire could. As the British tightened their grip, burning kraals, seizing cattle, and cutting off supply routes, Cetshwayo sent repeated messages asking for peace. But the British leadership refused. They wanted total victory, total submission, and total control. The final showdown came at Ulundi on July 4, 1879. Under a clear African sky, the British formed a massive square formation, an impregnable block of firepower. Inside were infantry, artillery, and Gatling guns, all protected by cavalry on the flanks. The Zulu army, still thousands strong, advanced to defend their homeland. Their chanting, their battle formations, their determination, it was the last stand of a proud nation fighting for its identity. As they charged, the British unleashed a storm of fire. Rifles cracked in disciplined volleys. Machine guns rattled relentlessly. Artillery thundered. The Zulu waves crashed again and against this square, but the British formation held firm. It was modern warfare against traditional valor, and by the end of the day, the grass at Ulundi was covered with fallen Zulu warriors. With that defeat, the Zulu Kingdom effectively collapsed. The British captured King Cetshwayo, exiling him and dividing Zululand into fragmented chiefdoms controlled by colonial authorities. The once unified and powerful Zulu nation was split apart, its political structure shattered. It was a calculated move to ensure that the Zulus would never again rise as a military threat. The war ended, but the consequences had only begun. The impact on the Zulu people was devastating. Families were displaced, cattle herds, the backbone of their economy, were seized, and political leadership was dismantled. The loss at Ulundi didn't just defeat an army, it broke a kingdom. In the years that followed, divisions deepened, internal conflicts rose, and British administrators imposed their own systems. For the Zulus, the war was not just about territory, it was about cultural survival. And while they endured, they emerged into a new world shaped by British colonial power. For Britain, the war became a lesson in both arrogance and adaptation. Isandlwana exposed the weakness of assuming easy victory in unfamiliar terrain. But the later campaigns showed how quickly the empire could regroup and deploy overwhelming force. The war reinforced the idea that British imperial rule must be backed by technological superiority and well-planned military strategies. Yet it also served as a reminder that no empire, no matter how vast, was immune to setbacks. Historically, the Zulu War is often remembered as a symbolic clash between traditional African power and expanding Western empire. It marked the end of an era when indigenous kingdoms in southern Africa could resist European expansion on equal terms. After the war, British influence spread rapidly across the region, setting the stage for deeper colonial control, economic exploitation, and political restructuring that shaped South African history for the next century. But more importantly, the war left a legacy of admiration and respect for the Zulus. Even British historians acknowledged their courage, discipline, and extraordinary fighting skill. The story of the Zulu War is not simply a tale of defeat. It is a reminder of how a determined people, armed with tradition and unity, stood up against one of the greatest empires of the age. Their resistance at places like Isandlwana has become legendary, echoing through history as one of the most powerful demonstrations of indigenous strength and resolve. And now that we've walked through this incredible chapter of history, I want to ask you, do you think the Zulus could have defeated Britain if they had access to the same weapons and technology, or did the outcome of the war depend on something deeper than just firepower? Share your thoughts in the comments.